You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Tess Willberg on the show with me today, and she has a phenomenal, it's called Marion Lane and the Midnight Murder, and what a fantastic book. This, we're going into a brand new year. When you're hearing this show, it is release day for this book. And, we're just a couple of days away from 2021, and which we all hope and pray is a magic year that gets us far away from 2020. So what a great way to start a year than with a new book. And Marion Lane and the Midnight Murder is definitely one that you need to have. Welcome to the show, Tess.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me. Tess, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be a bit strange, but actually the first time I ever considered writing a book was when I sat down to write Marion Lane, which was 3 years ago, more or less exactly 3 years ago. So since as far back as I can remember, my interests were science and biology. That was it. I was obsessed with studying the human body and physics. I knew I wanted to be in the medical field when I grew up, and that was the only thing I focused on. I completed a master's degree in chiropractic and was set on spending the rest of my life in that profession. But then after 2 years of working in South Africa, I left the country and moved to Malta with my partner. And when we arrived there, the job that I had been sort of promised didn't materialize. So I was left with a lot of time and no money, and I didn't know anyone there. And I realized that I was going to have to start my own practice, and that was going to take forever, and I wasn't going to have many patients in the beginning. So I was basically sitting at home a lot on my own, overthinking everything. And really, to cut a long story short, I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to kind of come up with something to spend my time on that felt worthwhile. And I had just this most random thought, and I explain this to people, and I know everyone's like, this is bizarre, but it was just this thought that popped into my head. It was like, I wonder what it would be like to write a book. And the feeling was so overwhelming and so profound that I just, honestly, I'd never thought of writing a book before that. But I've always been a big reader, love books. And my mom she's an English teacher, and she studied English literature. And so she's influenced me a lot in, this whole process. But from my own point of view, I was just a reader up until that point. But as I said, I had a lot of time. So I opened my laptop and I was like, okay, let me try. And I started writing this scene about a female detective, which she didn't have a name or anything. And she was running away from a killer who also didn't have a name. There was no plot. There was no point. I didn't even think it was actually going to be a book. I just had this feeling I needed to write something. I don't understand it, but that's how it started. And as soon as I think I wrote maybe a page, 2 pages of this random scene from nowhere. And then I put the laptop down, and the next day I woke up and I was like, oh, I can't wait to carry on with that story. And that's how it started. And literally every single day, because I have almost every single day free at that time, I would sit down and just write random scenes. And then as the story slowly started to come to me, I've always loved crime and mystery novels. If I'm going to read a book, 90% of the time it's going to be either a mystery or a fantasy. So the idea of a female detective and a detective agency that's very secret and hidden underground, and it all sort of came in little bits. It wasn't all at once. And that's it. I've been writing ever since. That was, as I say, about 3 years ago. And now I realize I'm a writer. So it's so surprising to me. And when I tell my family and I tell my mother, she's the most surprised, because as much as she loves books and reading and whatever, she says she never imagined that I would be a writer, because I'd never mentioned it to anyone. But that's how it started. So it feels very random, but it feels so right. It feels like this is the thing I should have been doing all along anyway.
Well, not only is this the place to share crazy stories, but those stories are embraced and celebrated here. I love that story so much. So when you began this book, when you sat down and it kind of had this opening scene in mind with a nameless detective being pursued by a nameless antagonist, what were you? Do you know what you were drawing from? Has there been any inspiration in your life, or was there a writer or a series or a book that kind of made an impression on you, that made you fall in love with this genre?
Well, Sherlock Holmes, I think, is probably the greatest inspiration. A lot of people have mentioned Agatha Christie when they read my book, but I think Sherlock Holmes and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I think I would say that was probably the primary inspiration. But as I say, I also have always been a fantasy reader, and I don't think my book has like full-on fantasy in it, but there are sort of a little bit of magical realism elements to it. And Tolkien is my all-time favorite writer, and I know that doesn't really make sense because he's not writing crime novels. But my childhood favorite book ever, and still one of my favorites, The Hobbit. And I think the connection there is just this feeling of escapism.
Right.
I love books that take you away. It doesn't have to be into Middle Earth or another place, but just the feeling of escaping the real world for a while. And I think that's what I was trying to get at with Marion Lane. That's why I created this, underground world that was so separate from real London, and so hidden, and all the gadgets and all that stuff, because I wanted the story to have it's a really strong sense of place. And the mystery side of it, I think, does come from Sherlock Holmes. And I just love that idea of this really clever detective who can, and as I say, Agatha Christie and Poirot and all that were definitely in there as well. But yeah, I think it's it was all these things that I didn't realize were inspiration. But when I think back, I'm like, yeah, all those books that I really loved. But yeah, I would say probably Tolkien and Conan Doyle are the biggest inspirations.
Well, Tess, in the more than 1,000 episodes that we've done of this podcast, there have been more people that have named Tolkien as an influence, and especially an early influence, than probably anyone else that's been mentioned on the show.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and then of course Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle are in that pantheon for sure. And it makes perfect sense to mix up Tolkien with Conan Doyle. Those two just make perfect sense to
it's just like the
mash
best
up.
Of both things. I just love it so much.
Yes, I find it fascinating that so many people were influenced by these early fantasy stories, and even people that write nothing that it seemingly has nothing to do with fantasy. Those are those early influences, and I'm sure there's probably a sociologist somewhere who could really,
and I want to know.
Make something of this.
It's incredible.
Well, that's a challenge to a listener out there. There's got to be someone who can connect these dots for us. We would love to hear that.
We all want to know.
We all want to know. So, Tess, you sit down in this moment of desperation meets inspiration, shall we say? And with your computer, you type out this scene. What happened after that? Were you intrigued by who these people were? Did you want to write, so that you could find out what the story was? How did I get the early inspiration and the just writing off the top of your head, but what caused you to pursue this further?
The beginning part it's quite a haze. I just remember being completely absorbed by the character Marion. As I say, she didn't have a name then, but she was this young female detective. That was always the case. And then I wanted to. The idea of a detective agency also came up pretty quickly, because I just thought it would be more exciting if she was working with a whole bunch of colleagues who were sort of similar age, and they were all training together. And then I thought, so as I said, these ideas were coming like in little dribbles, bit by bit, day by day. I would sit down and most of the time, as I was about to fall asleep, all these ideas would start coming. So I've decided there needed to be a detective agency, and I wanted it to be, the next thought was I wanted it to be very secretive. I wanted it to be sort of not really known to the outside world. And I thought, okay, in London, it had to be in London. I also don't really know why I thought that, but that was just, I thought that was where all detective agencies were. So I thought, okay, it had to be London and it had to be secretive. Now, where would you hide it? And then I was like, obviously it has to be underground, right? Where else? So that idea came. And then I think that was when I got really excited, because I started just thinking, oh my gosh, so it's underground. It must have it must have like ventilation, and it must have a gadgetry department, and it must have a filing department. And how do they communicate with above ground? And that was how I came up with the pneumatic tubes that are, people post these letters all throughout London to the detective agency underground via these pneumatic tubes. And then there has to be a filing station and a sorting station. And I just thought, I just get very excited about those kind of things. So I think the world of Miss Brickett's investigations and inquiries was probably the thing that kept me so excited. I kept finding new little additions, new little departments that I wanted to add. And then, of course, when I had a department, I was like, okay, who runs this department? What are their daily duties? And then, so definitely world building happened way before there was any plot. I didn't know what was going to happen in the story, other than that there was going to be a detective and a detective agency. And then I wrote, I don't even know what I wrote really. I think it was just like a whole bunch of scenes. It was awful. And the sort of laws of the world, I guess you could say, and the characters. And then I came to probably what you would call the first draft. I mean, as I say, I would never show that to anyone, but came to the end of that. And I thought, okay, this needs to be a proper book. I want this to be an actual story. So that was when I went about researching how you actually write a book. I mean, I had never heard of inciting incidents and midpoints and plot points until then. So I sat down and I watched countless YouTube videos and read everything I could. And I wrote a very basic plot sort of structure. And I tried to actually start writing a formal book. And I decided I'm writing a murder mystery, so there has to be a murder. So and there has to be a victim, and there has to be the killer and whatever. And it just came in little bits. And then once I thought I had a story, the next step was thinking, oh, maybe I could get it published, maybe. And I went about researching literary agents, and went through that whole process. And I think it was it was never a well plotted story. And I realize now, because I have just written the second book, actually. I realize now that that's how I am. That's the writer I am. I'm not a plotter by any means. I like to write a very basic, and sort of like inciting incident, midpoint, climax, and general theme, and then I just go. And it always, like everything I've plotted anyway, always changes. And I just, as I write, I come up with new characters and ideas, and it works for me. It's crazy. It's horrible for the editing stage, but it works.
Well, you alluded to this difference in writers, where one camp of writers tend to plot out in great detail, what's going to happen in the book before they start writing the book. And then the other camp is what we call pantsers, people that write by the seat of their pants, or I like the term discovery writer. And I think Brandon Sanderson probably came up with that. But you're a discovery writer in the best sense of that word, in that you wrote a first draft that really helped you discover the world and the characters. And when you then took what you had written and then kind of outlined it, so to speak, after the fact, how much of the things that you wrote in the first draft made it over to your revisions?
Oh, not a lot. Not the characters, definitely. I kept all the characters, and I kept all the gadgets, and I definitely kept the world and sort of all the rules. And I think the as I say, it's quite like a blur, because I was in a weird mind space when I wrote this book. But I think the very basic murder mystery stayed the same. But the second half, I remember, because especially after my agent had read it, we discussed it, and the second half of the book changed quite a lot. But yeah, I would say probably about 50% stayed the same. Yeah.
So at what point did the character of Marion Lane really start taking shape? And what things did you learn about her in the writing of her?
Yeah, she was pretty fully formed when I started. She was the only, I think she was the driving force for me wanting to write a book. She has a lot of personality traits that are similar to my mother and a lot of strong women that I've known, friends and so on. So she was pretty fully formed as I began. And I think the only thing that changed as I went was I made her, I just gave her a bit more of a character arc. So I made her start off being a little bit more timid than I had originally written her, so that she could grow in the first book into a stronger character by the end of it, and sort of find her feet a little bit. But I did learn a lot. Especially to do with her relationship with the other characters, like Bill, who is her best friend, who's also an apprentice detective, and then later on Kenny, who is an American detective who comes in sort of midway through the story. I learned how I didn't have those sort of those character interactions quite right in the beginning. But yeah, I think I drew on a lot of, especially with Mary and Bill, I drew on a lot of great platonic relationships that I've had with men. And but she was always pretty strong in my head, definitely, from the beginning.
You mentioned this the technology and things that you had dreamed up for how they communicate with the outside world and all of this great stuff. And there's a point where it feels, and this is going to be a bad comparison, so brace yourself, but it feels like Hogwarts in a way. in that we're talking about you know earlier in time. The book takes place in the 1950s,
Yeah.
but we're talking about forward thinking. How we deal with the world, and advances in technology that are really clever, that have nothing to do with microchips and things like that. But what were some of those? Uh, what was some of the motivation for thinking of this world, and how people are forward thinking, and um, you know um, how they deal with obstacles like that while being in the 1950s?
Yeah, I said it in the 1950s because firstly, I didn't want modern technology to kind of get in the way of what I had in mind, but I also wanted the inquirers to be a bit more advanced than the world was at that point. And I drew a lot of inspiration from, although you probably probably a bit far-fetched, but I drew a lot of inspiration from the spy gadgets that were around in the Cold War, especially the KGB and CIA. So I would take first of all, I would think, okay, what gadgets do I want my detectives to have? So let's say a listening device or a tracking device. And then I would go and research whether those things, any kind of variation of those things existed at that time. And a lot of them did sort of later on, sort of in the 60s during the, Cold War, the height of the Cold War. So I would take a gadget that I'd researched from, let's say, a KGB gadget, and just make it a little bit more magical and sort of a little bit more fun. And yeah, I wanted the inquirers to have this advanced technology because it just does set them it just sets them ahead of everyone else. And it also, I think, lends this slightly magical realism feel, which I wanted to bring in. I didn't want the gadgets or the world to be completely real. I wanted it to feel a little bit, as you say, like Harry Potter-ish. I know people keep saying that it gives them this Harry Potter feel, and I think that's why, because it's set in a time when you shouldn't have all those things, and it just feels a little bit like an alternative universe in a way, and that is what I was going for. So I'm glad people pick up on that.
When you said that at some point you realized this was going to be a murder mystery and you needed to kill someone, what was the tell me about it, kind of how that story sets up, and what the problem is that Marion Lane bumps up against.
Yeah, so I had to kill someone, and I needed it. So the theme that I came up with was that the murder victim and the killer were going to be inquirers. So they were going to be a part of this underground world, because I thought that sort of creates this locked room idea. So yeah, I went about just thinking about which characters it would make sense to have as the murder victim and whatever. And I thought that by having everything happening in this little world, it kind of, again, it just draws the reader away from reality. That was kind of the whole thing. And Marion is now caught in this, she's a new apprentice and she's working for this place that she is only just learning about really now. She's only been there for 4 months and someone is killed. And she loves this agency so much. It's drawn her out of her very boring life above ground. And she realizes that this murder is going to disturb the world that she's come to know. And she also then has one of her close confidants accused of the murder. So she has to go about solving the crime, or she feels this new world is going to be taken away from her.
when in creating a locked door, in air quotes, locked door mystery, like this, did that challenge you in ways to, okay, if we're going to make a mystery, then there are some connections that the readers need to make, and some sleuthing of their own. If you really want to, be a mystery reader, you're always trying to outthink the writer, at some point. Were you thinking in terms like that, in constructing the mystery that we as readers would get to unravel? Were you, thinking of ways you could misdirect the reader and things like that?
Yeah, definitely in the editing stage. I would say in the drafting stage, I wasn't quite there yet. But yeah, in the editing stage, that was the best part. I love a puzzle. I love being able to solve a puzzle, and I thought that the readers would love that too. So yeah, you want to create characters that seem guilty, but they're not, and then ones that seem guilty, but they are, and ones that seem innocent. And because I have so many characters in this world, that was quite fun. That was a lot of fun. And then I have all these different, rooms and gadgets, and that all come into play with the murder mystery as well. And so planting, red herrings and all these false clues, I would say that was definitely the most fun I've had with the book. And but as I say, I did it mostly in the editing stage, because I definitely wasn't quite there when I wrote the draft. It was my first book ever, so I'll give myself a break.
Absolutely. If you would have set this book in 2020 or 2019 or 2017 when you began thinking about this, it would have been a very different book. If in modern times with modern technology, you could just pull out a cell phone and make a couple phone calls and fix a lot of things. Is that one reason why you decided to set this in the 1950s? Because it kind of removes all those things?
Definitely, that was the number one reason. I didn't want that. Because I wanted to create gadgets, and there's no point creating gadgets if you're gonna then have all the cell phones and GPS. No, yeah, that was the reason. And also, I just have a thing about the 1950s. I think it's such a atmospheric time. I just love movies and books that 1940s, 1950s, 60s. I love it. So yeah, but 100% the technology was the primary reason.
Love it. So when you found a publisher for the book, and it's coming out everywhere, and at some point you start thinking, how do I follow this up? What's going to come next? Because people are going to love this book, and then people are going to want more about this. How did you start thinking of your writing career? I guess once you realized you had a writing career, and where this is going forward.
Yeah, well, from when I decided that I was going to get an agent and try and get it published, I knew it was going to be a series. I think the main reason was I was just like, I'm going to go to so much effort creating this world and all this technology and all these gadgets. I can't just let it be one book. So that was the main reason. And I did actually write out, believe it or not, a plot for three books, which is nothing like, it's completely different now in my head. But I have in my head at least 3 books, and I'm sure I can say this now, but I've written book 2, and that's off to my editors now, and I'm about to write book 3. So the story is, Marion has a lot left to do.
I love it. Cannot wait to see what's coming next. If people listen to this and they love your story and want to hear more about what's coming up next and all that, where can they find you online?
Yeah, Yeah, so tawillberg.com, that's my website, and I'm on Instagram at TA_Willberg and on Twitter at Tess_Amy.
Excellent. Well, we're going to put links to Marion Lane and the Midnight Murder in the show notes of this episode. You can pick it up in Kindle edition, audiobook edition, hardcover, however you love books, you can grab it. And Tess, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, it was lovely. Thank you for having me.
A hitman with a conscience. Ian Bragg is paid to kill people. Only bad people and not many, but for a great deal of money. Case the target. Make the hit. Move on. Until he meets the woman with sparkling green eyes who changes everything. A few pre-readers had this to say about Ian Bragg. Mark Dawson, million-selling thriller author, says a rip-roaring ride from start to breathless finish. Craig Martell hit a home run with The Operator. The taut, lean prose and lightning-fast pace make this a page-turner without sacrificing an ounce of story or depth. You'll find yourself rooting for the hitman main character as he faces the toughest decision of his career. The Operator is the start of a new thriller series I expect to see burning up bestseller list for years to come, says A.C. Fuller, author of The Crime Beat and Alex Vane media thrillers. Suave, romantic, and lethal, Ian Bragg is everything you want in a highly paid assassin. Can't wait to ride this train, says James Blatch, self-publishing formula. It's been a long time since I fell this hard in love with a book, a very long time. Author of Women of Wine County romantic suspense Terry Wells Brown says. Grab this book from Craig Martell, The Operator. Both Barrels Publishing is the brainchild of successful indie author James P. Sumner. He has self-published over 15 titles in the last 5 years and has over 800,000 downloads so far in his career, meaning he has a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with the indie publishing community. Knowing the struggles of the modern-day indie author as well as he does, he wanted to create a platform that would allow writers of any level to learn the ropes, navigate the pitfalls, and produce a professional novel without wasting time or money in the process. Both Barrels Publishing is the perfect one-stop shop for any indie author, combining James's expertise with his own team of editors and designers so you can help your novel realize its full potential and learn how to publish yourself. The purpose of Both Barrels Publishing is to help indie authors get their novels ready for publication without all the stress, hassle, and unnecessary expense. We want to make your lives easier, which is why we're giving you access to a top-notch team to publish your novels, along with a generous discount on their services. You can also work one-on-one with James to learn the intricacies of self-publishing. No hidden cost, no false promises. We simply want you to publish the best version of your novel. BothBarrelsPublishing.com.